Indigenous Rights Radio, because knowledge is power.
You are now listening to Cultural Survival's Global News Bulletin. Every month, Cultural Survival brings you the latest news impacting Indigenous peoples across the globe. This October edition features important stories from Europe, North, Central, South America, Africa, Asia, and beyond. In the US, on Monday, October 1st, the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians and Northern Michigan University's Center for Native American Studies came together to observe Orange Sword Day, which is dedicated to honoring the victims of Native American boarding schools. During the event, tribal members shared personal stories about the enduring trauma caused by these institutions, which aimed to erase the cultural identity of Indigenous children. Taylor LaPlante, Vice Chair of Sault Ste. Marie Tribe, emphasized the importance of preserving culture and the ongoing healing process. The event served as a reminder of the historical injustices experienced by Indigenous communities and highlighted the ongoing efforts to address the enduring impacts of boarding schools. Similarly, the Onondaga Nation has taken a significant step towards reclaiming its ancestral land in upstate New York. After centuries of displacement, the nation has regained 1,000 acres of land near Syracuse. Honeywell International transferred the land on September 30 as part of a federal Superfund settlement. It is a small but a symbolic victory for the Onondaga Nation, who have been fighting for the return of their land for decades. The nation's legal battle continues as they seek to reclaim a much larger portion of their ancestral territory. In Canada, the Canadian Medical Association has issued a formal apology to Indigenous peoples for the systemic racism within a healthcare system. While the apology is a significant step, many Indigenous physicians remain skeptical about its sincerity and effectiveness. This apology follows years of documented discrimination and mistreatment of Indigenous patients and healthcare providers. Many Indigenous physicians have personally experienced racism in medical education and healthcare settings. Although the Canadian Medical Association acknowledges past and ongoing harms, some Indigenous physicians argue that the apology does not fully address the depth and breadth of the issues. They express concerns about the organization's ability to deliver meaningful change and repair the damaged trust. As the country continues its journey towards reconciliation, the Canadian Medical Association's apology serves as a reminder of the ongoing work needed to address systemic racism and ensure equitable health care for Indigenous peoples. In Australia, a team of Indigenous rangers and scientists has made a groundbreaking discovery in Western Australia. The elusive night parrot, once believed extinct for over a century, has been found thriving in a previously unknown population. Using sound recordings, the team identified up to 50 individuals of this nocturnal bird, considered the quote, holy grail of a bird watching, unquote. The discovery, published in the journal Wildlife Research, offers hope for the survival of this critically endangered species. Indigenous rangers played a crucial role in the project, leveraging their deep knowledge of the local environment to locate the parrots. The findings highlight the importance of Indigenous-led conservation efforts in preserving Australia's unique biodiversity. Similarly, First Nations activist Joyce Clark has passed away at the age of 85. The Eagle Elder was a trailblazer in Aboriginal and women's rights activism, serving as an advisor to New South Wales Labor governments throughout her life. Federal MP Linda Burney praised her as an quote, example of the resilience of our culture and people, unquote. Joyce Clark overcame a challenging childhood marked by racism and discrimination, evolving into an international activist who shed light on injustices in Australia. She was also a key campaigner for the yes vote in the 1967 constitutional referendum. Moving to South Africa. Heritage Day is celebrated on September 24th in South Africa, marking a month filled with cultural activities that honor the Rainbow Nation's rich heritage. This year, the George Heritage Trust, in partnership with the Landmark Foundation, launched an initiative to plant 10 trees at the historic Old Stone Building, focusing on the significance of native and historic trees. The Old Stone Building was selected for its historical importance within the town's narrative. As noted by the George Herald, the Speaker of the Council of George remarked, quote, "The Khoisan people were the first inhabitants of the Cape, keepers of ancient knowledge and guardians of our lands. Throughout the history, we have witnessed attempts to erase or diminish that identity through marginalization, forced removals, and the imposition of foreign systems, but here you are, still standing," unquote. Similarly, the call for the Khoisan people to be recognized as the, quote, First Nation, unquote, of South Africa is gaining traction, with a growing support for their demand for representation in parliament and provincial legislatures. Recently, Khoi and San people gathered at Eldorado Park, south of Johannesburg, to celebrate Heritage Day and advocate for this recognition. The attendees heard from Khoisan traditional leaders and local figures, including Bishop Dulton Adams, chair of chairs in the Gutin legislature and the Gauteng chair of the African Christian Democratic Party. Adams emphasized their primary demand for recognition as the First Nation and rightful owners of the land. Additionally, they are seeking representations in the National Assembly, the National Council of Provinces, and the provincial legislatures. Now moving to Asia. Starting news from Malaysia. A coalition of environmental, human rights, and indigenous organizations has called on the European Union to designate the Malaysian state of Sarawak as high-risk area under its new anti-deforestation regulation. The coalition argues that Sarawak's extensive deforestation and violations of indigenous people's rights warrant the designation. They cite the state's land laws and industrial expansion as threats to indigenous territories. The European Union's deforestation-free products regulation aims to restrict imports of commodities linked to deforestation. A high-risk designation would require stricter customs check and due diligence from European Union companies importing timber and palm oil from Sarawak. While the Malaysian government has implemented sustainability standards, the coalition claims they are insufficient to address the ongoing violations. They urge the European Union to take action to protect forest and indigenous rights. In Nepal, a hydropower company, Shangri-La Urja Private Limited in Nepal, is facing accusation of forging signatures, providing false reports, and damaging sacred lands. The Chujung Khola hydropower project has sparked conflict with indigenous Pote Singsa communities who rely on the land for their livelihoods. Locals allege the company violated laws by lying in government reports and proceeding without proper consultations. The project's environmental impact assessment reportedly contains fabricated information, including inaccurate data on affected species and the project size. Locals also claim their signatures were forged during a public hearing and that the company bulldozed through their lands without consent. A lawsuit has been filed by Chamtang Kathmandu Welfare Society, highlighting violations of national and international laws. The company director denies the allegation and awaits a lawsuit filed by civil society organizations. The case highlights the ongoing struggle between development projects and the indigenous communities in Nepal. Locals are hoping for a court order to halt the projects, while the company maintains that it is proceeding legally. In India, Thousands of indigenous Adivasi people in India are protesting against being forcibly evicted from their ancestral forest to make way for tiger reserves. Protests have occurred at well-known reserves such as Nagarhole, Udanti Sitanadi, Kaziranga, Rajaji and Indravati. The National Tiger Conservation Authority's decision to evict more Adivasis has caused outrage among indigenous communities. Nearly 400,000 Adivasis are facing eviction from tiger reserves across the country. Adivasi activists argue that the establishment of tiger reserves on their lands violates their rights, and that they are not consulted in the process. They accuse the government and conservation organizations of forcefully displacing them from their ancestral homes. The government's action has been criticized for following an outdated and harmful conservation model that disregards indigenous rights. There is a call for a more inclusive approach that acknowledges the interconnectedness of forest, indigenous peoples, and wildlife. Now moving to Mexico. In Mexico, the aftermath of Hurricane John in the coastal town of Las Tunas, Guerrero is a stark reminder of the storm's devastating power. Streets are littered with debris. Homes are flooded and basic necessities are scarce. The once vibrant community is now a scene of widespread destruction. Piles of ruined furniture, appliances, and clothing line the main street, while the river continues to overflow its banks. Residents work tirelessly to clean up their homes and salvage what they can. Many residents lost everything in the storm and they are struggling to meet their basic needs. Food, water, and shelter are in short supply, and situation is dire. As days turn into weeks, the community of Las Tunas is desperately waiting for aid to arrive. In Guatemala, indigenous leaders have called on Guatemala's Congress to reject corrupt candidates for the country's Supreme Court and appeals chambers. In an open letter, the authorities who observed the election process urged lawmakers to prioritize the needs of their constituents and select magistrates committed to upholding justice and democracy. The indigenous groups demanded a transparent voting process, including a roll call vote and public disclosure of individual votes. They also cautioned against electing candidates with a history of rulings that undermine democratic principles or favor those in power. In Ecuador, after enduring its worst drought in 61 years, Ecuador has finally received rainfall in the northern highlands and Amazon region. The intense drought had severely reduced water flow to power plants and caused widespread forest fires. The National Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology reported varying intensity rainfall across the affected areas. The Emergency Operation Committee has issued a red alert for 19 provinces due to the ongoing water deficit, forest fires, and their impact on agriculture and electricity production. In 2024 alone, Ecuador has recorded 1,330 fires, destroying approximately 8,600 hectares of land. The much-needed rainfall brings some relief to the country, but the long-term effects of the drought remains to be seen. In Argentina, indigenous communities from Argentina's Cocoy province are said to denounce severe human rights violations before the United Nations Human Rights Council. Representatives accompanied by the Indigenous Legal Resource Center traveled to Geneva for the 57th session. The group will focus on recent discriminatory policies and violent repression by the Cocoy provincial government during the 2023 Kukeneko protests. They argue these actions violate international treaties and deepen institutional violence against indigenous communities. Nestor Queret, leader of the Oclé indigenous people and member of the 3rd Malone de la Paz, expressed concerns about the province's constitutional reforms, which he believes will exacerbate rights violations. That is all for this edition of Cultural Survival's Global News Bulletin. Stay tuned for our next podcast. For more information on the rights of indigenous peoples, visit cs.org and follow Cultural Survival on Facebook, Instagram, and X.